My understanding is that ultimately you came across HIT training, HIT, right? High intensity training. Not take out the extra I that you see a lot nowadays. Just high intensity training. Can you describe what that is, and then kind of how you discovered that, and maybe the physiology behind it, why it works?
So as you noticed, I didn't call it high intensity training, and I do this on purpose. I really refer to it as evidence based training. And the reason is in fitness, cults are established very, very quickly. Carnivore, vegan, um, CrossFit. So it's generally referred to as high intensity training, but I don't call it that because it's redundant. Training must be intense to be training. If it's not, that's not training. So it's like, what are we calling it? So it's generally referred to high intensity training. This term came from Dr. Ellington Darden, who was a researcher and worked for. He actually graduated from University of Florida, right up by you. Which is why when you go into Gainesville Health and Fitness, where all the X Force equipment is, his picture's right there. So he coined the term high intensity training almost by accident during a seminar once, and it just stuck. Okay, but before they were just calling it strength training. So the principles behind this high intensity strength training approach, or the evidence based training approach, is the primary driver of the exercise stimulus. Now we must keep in mind that exercise is a stimulus. Your body does not change as you are exercising. There is literally nothing productive other than psychological endorphin related side effects.
Sorry, I just want to stop there real quick. That was one thing that you taught me that I think is so crucial, man, which is the idea like there is a lot of people go to the gym and they do the exercise, but they don't work the muscles. They don't stimulate the actual muscles. And that's what's more important than doing 20 reps or doing, whatever it is.
Right, because we need to realize the exercise itself provides nothing of value. Nothing. It is merely a stimulus. And in fact, everything about the exercise is negative to your body. It produces damage, shearing forces, inflammation, reduction in recovery resources, loss of glycogen, dehydration, cortisol. Everything about exercise is actually bad. But the trade off is accepting the negative side effects of the exercise itself for a positive adaptation if the stimulus is properly applied. So, exercise itself is just a stimulus. It tells your body to do something. All right. And this is what people really need to realize, because if they're under the impression that if I go in the gym and I'm sculpting and toning, which is physiologically impossible, you don't sculpt or tone anything, then more would be better. Because people are under the impression that as I do these curls, I'm shaving fat off my arms. And as I do these curls, my arms are growing like blowing up a balloon. No, that's not it. Essentially, what we're doing is damaging the body, stressing the body, and this stimulates a biochemical response in your cells to tell your body to change if you give it adequate rest, adequate nutrition, hydration, stuff like that. So it must be intense in nature to stimulate these biochemical signals. Otherwise, it's just active work with muscle. Otherwise, you're doing, what most people are doing in the gym is akin to free manual labor. They're just using their body.
And one thing real quick I wanted to touch on with that is, because you were telling me I was getting bummed out when I was working out because I was like, "Oh, man, like, I thought I worked my arms out really hard this last time of trying to get these guns, and then but, only my chest got bigger and I lost some fat on my gut," which is stupid. It's like, "What?" But that's part of it, right? Like, you're chemically changing your body, and how it responds to it is really I mean, it just depends on the person.
Yeah. So that's where the sculpting and toning thing really confuses people, because people are under the impression they can make their body however They can make it look however they want as long as they have the right program or enough time. This is wrong. Because if that were true, why do we have weight classes in sports instead of time classes? Because if anybody could be any type of physique or any type of body weight or any type of muscle, you just give them enough time and eventually they get there. But instead, we have weight classes because we know there's something genetic to that. So, but anyway, just to categorize or summarize the points of high intensity training is intensity of effort in your exercises are the driving component for your response. The harder you train, the better your response. And we'll get into why that is. When you train very hard, you cannot tolerate as much exercise. Duh. It doesn't take a genius to understand that. You can walk a lot longer than you can sprint. We all know that. Sprinting is more intense. So you want to reduce the amount of exercise that you do in a workout to accommodate the intensity. You can have both. So the research shows whether or not you train once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times a week, you will end up at the exact same destination, which is your genetic potential. You don't get better exercise results by training more, considering you're doing it correctly. So the principles are train really hard, focus on just that, training hard, which a lot of people pull back on how hard they train so they can spend more time in the gym, thinking that they're burning more fat and they're doing more whatever bullshit. Adjust the amount of exercise you do per workout to accommodate that intensity, and then adjust the frequency so that you don't overtrain. Those are the main principles. Now, one I like to add to it is use slower, more controlled repetitions. And the reason is the faster the repetition, the more external forces are placed on your connective tissues. The more external forces placed on your connective tissues, the more you beat them up, the more you wear them out, the more likely you are for a connective tissue injury. And this has been proven many, many times. Force equals mass times acceleration. If we increase acceleration, we increase force. That force is transmitted to your connective tissue and beats it up. All right. So the way I train and the way I train people is to control the weight. Take maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds to lift the weight. Generally, even twice as long to lower the weight. And in fact, I was at an exercise seminar over the weekend. And Dr. James Fisher, who is one of the premier researchers on muscle growth and hypertrophy in the world at this point, he presented some new literature that shows that slowing down the lowering phase even more can promote even better improvements in strength and muscle growth. So now what I decided to do over the past couple of days is make it like unusually slow. And there's a lot of science behind why this happens, but it appears that slowing that negative down a lot is not only extremely beneficial for not beating the crap out of yourself, but can actually preferentially recruit fast twitch motor units and stimulate even more growth and strength. So those are the principles behind it. And these principles are not new. You know, this approach to training has been around since the 70s with Arthur Jones, that guy sitting behind me in that picture. He created Nautilus equipment, which at some point or another people have probably seen. And that's what he focused on. Train really hard. Don't train too much. Don't train too often, because remember, this is a stimulus. And if your body cannot repair from the damage and the stress from the exercise, then it cannot produce an adaptation. Like, you got to look at exercise like going out in the sun. The sun is a stress on your skin. The ultraviolet light damages your skin, and your skin doesn't like it. That's why it hurts. As a response, your body produces more melanin to darken your skin, because darker surfaces reflect ultraviolet light. So it's a protective mechanism against that stress. Your body does the same thing. Your body gets stronger to protect itself against the stress of muscle fatigue. All right. The stronger your body is, the easier shit in the world is, obviously. And unless you allow that time for your body to make these adaptations and you implement a workout too soon, it's like going into the sun with a sunburn, expecting to get tan.
I mean, I will say that when we started training together, man, it was one 30-minute session a week, and I still was getting insane results. Now, so I one part of that though is I guess I mean you were saying that when you first start training, you haven't been training in a while, you can see bigger because you haven't been stimulating anything, your body, it's a huge change. So it can actually lead to way more results. And then as you go along, you keep training, then you have times of plateaus and things like that, right? But I mean, initially I was doing 1 day a week, 30 minutes. But when you say high intensity, I think this is the key. You ain't playing, bro. Like, and I've learned how to do that through you, and I guess that is somewhat of an advantage. I've trained with you because man, I was doing it alone, and then you got in there, and I was like, oh shit, like I have been dilly, like I've been dicking around. Like when you got in there, and now I know enough. I've done it enough now to where I'm like, I can tell now, like, okay, this is not, I'm not getting it in hard enough. I gotta, pump it up way hard. Because one of the things that happens, I think, that you showed me was when it starts getting tough, that's when you gotta double down. Like when it starts like getting when you start feeling the burn, that's not the stop signal. That's the you need to take everything you got in you, like a savage beat, like animal. Like you described it as someone's trying to kill your mom. Like, how would you behave if like someone's trying to kill your mom, like, and you were in the room? Like, it's taking everything to where like you literally cannot move whatever you're working at, you cannot move it no matter how hard you try. And that's when you know you're done.
Yeah, so this is because the goal, if your goal is to build strength. Now let's clarify one thing first. There's no difference in training for strength and training for muscle. Anyone who says there is a difference is a fucking moron. They're clueless, okay? Muscle grows as a side effect of improving muscular strength. All right. So essentially, what happens is your body doesn't care about how big its muscles are. Bigger muscles actually are disadvantageous to survival. Bigger muscles require more calories, harder to dissipate heat. More body weight requires more effort to move your body around, thereby reducing metabolic efficiency. More muscles is a bad thing. That's why most people don't grow big muscles. Evolutionarily, it's a negative adaptation. Your body actually wants to get as strong as possible with as little muscle as possible. All right. So what happens is your body wants to get strong. As a side effect of improving strength, you have filaments in your muscles called titin, actin, and myosin. The actin and myosin filaments are the ones that connect to each other and produce strength. It's just like Velcro. When you hook two pieces of Velcro together, it's virtually the same thing. Now, what happens is when you stimulate an improvement in muscular strength, your body adds more myosin. The myosin are like the hooks that grab onto the Velcro. If you look at Velcro very, very closely, you got the fuzz, which is the material, and then you have all these little hooks that hook onto the threads. So when you grow muscle, you're growing hooks. You're growing more things that could hook onto those threads, making the amount of force the muscle can produce greater. So when we add more of these hooks, more of these myosin, you got to make room for them. So the muscle cell expands in size to accommodate more myosin. And now you have bigger muscles. It is a side effect of strength. You cannot train for one or the other. Now, the reason people think you can train for one or the other is because they look at selection bias. You look at the type of people who gravitate towards strength sports like powerlifting, strongman. They're like big and fat generally. Then you look at people who gravitate towards bodybuilding. They don't look like they're lifting that much weight, but they're much more muscular. Well, and here's the reason. Generally, the powerlifters had bad genetics for bodybuilding. They were always kind of fat and fluffy. So they gravitated towards just lifting weight because they never looked good when they did lift weights. So now you're left with a bunch of people who are very strong but don't really look good. Because if they did look good, they'd be over at bodybuilding. But they just have genetics that don't allow them to do that. Then you look at the bodybuilding side. All these people look really, really good no matter what they do. And it doesn't benefit them to lift a shitload of weight So they don't. And then what people do is they say, oh, well, bodybuilders don't lift that much weight, so they're building for muscle growth. And strong men lift a lot of weight, so they're building for strength. No, dummy. It's called selection bias. You're looking at a small sample size of elite individuals and contributing what they do to how they look. It would be no different than looking at the NBA and saying, well, dribbling up and down a wood floor and shooting a ball into a basket makes you tall. No, tall people gravitate towards basketball. It's that simple. So the goal is we want to make your muscles stronger. All right. We want to stimulate this stress in as many muscle fibers as possible. Back in 1957, there was a Harvard neurologist named Dr. Elwood Henneman coined something called the Henneman size principle. What he found was the harder you push your body, the more intent you put behind your muscle contractions. Basically, the harder you try, the more muscle fibers your nervous system excites, meaning turns on. So if your goal is to stimulate the most muscle growth and the most muscle strength, you obviously want to stimulate the most muscles, correct? Well, Dr. Elwood Henneman says, well, it's an accepted neurological phenomenon that you use the most muscle when you push the hardest. So thereby, it makes sense, push really hard to stimulate as many muscles as possible to stimulate the most muscle growth as possible. And that's where the high intensity training approach comes from. It just comes off of basic neurology and basic physiology. So that is why you want to push very, very hard. A lot of people have a hard time doing this because, like you said, everything your body's telling you to stop. When you get to the point where you want to stop the exercise is literally the point where the exercise begins, because it's that discomfort where you start to push your body hard and recruit all those muscle fibers you've been trying to recruit and stimulate. Now, can you see results stopping short? Of course. But most people are probably getting 60 to 70% of their potential by doing that. If you want that other 30%, the maximum your body is capable of, you have to push hard. So that's the other thing. You see a lot of people who do different things and they still look good. Okay, well, remember the genetics thing. Some people have very favorable genetics for muscle growth, just like some people have very favorable genetics for getting dark skin or growing body hair.
I want to stop you real quick. With the genetic side of things, I mean, how much does genetics play a factor in your body composition and what you're capable of doing in terms of gaining muscle and all kinds of stuff?
In terms of muscle growth, it's everything.
Wow. Okay.
In terms of body composition, however, it plays a role, but not as much of a role. For instance, everybody can be fit. Not everybody can be shredded. That's usually genetic predispositions because we're born with a certain number of fat cells. Okay, the people who get very, very obese are born with somewhere probably around 200 to 300 billion fat cells. Unless you surgically remove them, you can't get rid of fat cells. They're like balloons. Either they're deflated or inflated. When they're inflated, you're obese. When they're deflated, you're lean. All right, when you put stuff in them, you get fat. The people who are just genetically ripped no matter what they eat probably have around 10 to 15 billion fat cells. We're talking about like a fifth or a tenth. And this is something you can't really change. But then there comes other genetic predispositions like beta receptors and alpha receptors, insulin sensitivity. Is where the fat cells accumulate. If you notice, some people have a lot of fat in one area but not another. Well, they were born with more cells there. They're born with more balloons there. Now you could surgically remove the balloons, but a lot of the times when people do this, they just pile fat on somewhere else. So that's not a very good approach. But genetics, and this is the problem with the fitness industry too, is that genetics are virtually everything with muscle growth. But they're also quite important with body composition. How your body looks as a result of exercise, whether you have big shoulders, big arms, big chest, big legs, or small arms and big chest, or small shoulders and big legs. It's genetics. Sorry. That's not very marketable, but it is what it is.
Accept yourself, goats.